Welcome to another episode of Athens and Jerusalem. Let's begin where we can't escape. Let's begin with Logos.
Now, I would say that this openness, this being in the world, this referring to the world, to objects in the world, what I would like to call self-transcendence, this is disappearing as soon as you project a human being into a lower dimension than its own dimension.
The point of the V goes up to the nuclear explosion that created it.
Tell me this, Dr. Oppenheimer. Do you ever become frightened at what you're finding out here in this area that can't be measured in either time or space?
You see, that's a real point.
Do not be afraid. Open your hearts, open up your hearts.
Open up your hearts to Athens and Jerusalem. The infants of our culture, united, independent, polarized, and even bloody. Athens, the cradle of wisdom and rationality. Jerusalem, the cradle of faith and spirituality. In this podcast, we look at reunion. Could reason be more than modern secular skepticism? And could spirituality be more than belief? Welcome to another episode of the Athens and Jerusalem podcast. And today we have what I would say is maybe a bit provocative topic. The question or the thesis we have is that that there haven't actually been. We have been philosophizing now for more or less 2,500 years, as we know, probably much longer, but this is the main idea we have in our Western society, that this is philosophy. And the thesis is that this hasn't actually been very improving. More or less, we have been continuing the same questions over and over and over again. And yeah, so Stephen, you were the one who had this idea. Could you try to explain a little bit more how do you understand this?
Well, it's famously said that all of philosophy is footnotes to Plato. I think that was Alfred North Whitehead. And that very neatly encapsulates the thesis, I suppose. And that is that the main questions of philosophy were posed 2,500 years ago. Questions on the metaphysical side, such as what is the world made of, what is the ground of being, and so forth. But also on the ethical side, how should we live? What constitutes a good life? What constitutes a moral life? How do we achieve happiness, and so forth? And in a way, all the philosophizing and I'll particularly refer to the Western tradition, which is well documented, in which we kind of have a starting point with the pre-Socratics. But the question is, how much progress has been made in answering these questions? And to which all of this philosophizing is kind of footnotes to those original questions that were asked. David Chalmers, a living philosopher, a few years ago did a poll of working philosophers across a range of questions, fundamental questions of philosophy, like, is there one kind of thing or two kinds of things, and so forth. The basic questions, and polled professional philosophers as to what their opinions were about these. There's a multiple choice. And what was found was that there is a, not surprising, but still, I think, shocking degree of no one has reached any degree of consensus about any of the fundamental questions of philosophy. And this despite many brilliant minds over thousands of years now grappling with these questions. And whenever someone proposes what seems like a clean answer to any one of these questions, someone else comes along and finds another angle that throws it into doubt. So what we end up with is a kind of, hamster wheel of thinking about these things. in which we go round and around, but we never stop at any kind of consensus about what the answer is, which really distinguishes it from the scientific project, in which there is also movement and it's very dynamic and nothing is ever fully settled, but at least there is consensus is built around certain fundamentals, like what is the equation for gravity and how does light work and so forth. And there's fundamental consensus at a certain level in science, but when it comes to philosophy, there's no fundamental consensus whatsoever. And so I guess the question could be, what's up with that? Because both of these disciplines are striving for objectivity. They're striving for to be as logical as possible, as rational as possible. They're both striving at getting at the truth, but one seems to succeed and the other doesn't. At least I'll throw that out there. Well, maybe it's actually succeeding. Maybe maybe the goal is not to come to a consensus about these questions, but maybe the goal is the process itself. And in that sense, it's been a very successful thing. And one could take the opposite side and say, well, this isn't a failure at all. This is simply philosophy doing its thing, which is a form of mental exercise, a form of keeping us as rational as possible, given that we're fundamentally irrational beings, as a form of providing certain guardrails to our thinking, without which, who knows where we would be. Maybe without philosophy, we would be less civilized as a species. Maybe we look at its lack of consensus opinions and say, well, this is a problem, or we could say, well, this is not a problem at all, because that's not the point of philosophy. The point of philosophy is embodied in the very structure of the society that we live in the civilizations that we've built over the millennia. So those would just be some opening thoughts about it.
Because to give some examples, for instance, what I think it's, because when I'm listening to like science, theory of science discussions, I often have this feeling that if they had just been, reading a little bit more about in the history of ideas, earlier philosophers, they would have seen that a lot of these discussions have been going on for several. For instance, one of these discussions that are like alive nowadays is our knowledge. Is this something that we are like constructing as human beings, or is knowledge something that actually exists in the world and we are able to, to receive from the world as part of the world? And this was also in the Middle Age. It was a huge discussion. It was called universalism, and it was a big discussion between nominalists, that is the one who is believing that human is the creator of knowledge, and rationalists. That was, of course, the whole antique, like Plato or Aristotle, is this kind of thinkers that was into rationalism. And an interesting thing is that, of course, that the nominalist won in many ways, especially with the natural science revolution. But what is often I realize when I'm like into, a lot of nominalists today are using Aristotle as like an argument for their own position, and especially when it comes to doing empirical science. And of course, Aristotle would say that the most interesting, if we are searching the quality of existence, even empirically, we are searching for the essence, like the form. And this is often forgotten because the form would mean that there actually are something that is essential in every object or phenomena in the world that we are actually able to grasp. So that's one example. A different example is this idea about coherence or consistency as an argument for truth. I know that I was listening to philosopher telling me that they had finally finished the whole question about what is truth. And that was finished by realizing 8 different ways of understanding what truth is. And one of these is this about coherence or consistency. That means as long as we are keeping like a consistent or coherent system, then we could understand everything inside this system as truth, as long as it's coherent. And the problem with this is, of course, that maybe the whole axiomatic system, maybe the whole system is just a lie. Like, and Hannah Arendt is showing this, that for instance, that the theory of Nazism or communism has this idea of being like a consistent theory of life, and of course if we use common sense, like just experience what this is, of course this is not true. This is completely wrong to behave in this way that Nazism or communism is behaving and treating human beings. So it's not like you don't even need to argue against it. It could just be like, but listen, look what is going on around us, and this is the truth. What is actually shown in the world by behaving to this consistent theoretical approach. So that was just 2.
Yeah, I like that. I like what that invites us to consider about truth, that we can kind of move in 2 directions when thinking about locating truth. You know, in the one direction, you're going behind the scenes. You're asking, well, what are the forms? What are the Platonic realities behind it? What are the laws of nature? What are the sort of those invisible foundations upon which the visible is grounded? And try to get at that, which is, you know, kind of the scientific project. You know, but on the other end is, if you give up on the idea of having direct contact with that invisible realm of the Platonic forms, then you're left with looking elsewhere for verifying what truth is, and that other end of things is to look to the fruit that it produces. So if it is, because just looking at the thing itself and asking, well, is it coherent? You can create a coherent system based on a lot of nonsense propositions, and the thing can be perfectly internally consistent, but visibly false because of what it produces, just like exactly the point you made. And I think that makes us wonder whether our best way of getting at truth is not through this imaginary sort of making contact, with the invisible realm, but rather seeing what it produces in the world. And if it produces something, useful, true, good, then we label it true. That takes us, I think, more in the direction of, say, the American pragmatism of William James. I resonate a lot with his ideas. I've read his book on pragmatism, and it struck me as being a very very convincing, slightly deflationary of the philosophical project, because it lets go of the idea of actually coming up with the true and correct propositions that are the ultimate, ground of things. And it says, look, we don't have access to that, but what we can do is say, look, does this have, as he put it, cash value? I suppose maybe a very American way of putting it, I suppose. What's the cash value of the idea? I mean, Jesus had something similar. If I could pull a 180, when he was asked, well, how do we tell the true prophets from the false prophets? And he said, by their fruits you shall know them. That's just, the sort of modern American translation of that is, it's got cash value. So what's the cash value of the philosophical project? It isn't necessarily that we know that we've hit upon the ultimate reality of things, like, say, it's either monism or dualism, or it's nominalism or rationalism or whatever. but the thing has cash value. And well, what's the cash value of the philosophical project? It keeps us at least maybe directionally correct. It keeps us trying to think rigorously, trying to think objectively, trying to think out of our own biases, trying to think in a way that benefits all rather than a single point of view.
Yeah, that might be, but I'm actually, I think maybe even, I'm not sure that this is a good way of understanding truth either. This more like utilitarian way of understanding, and that there should be some kind of output or something that you're getting out of it. I think actually, and now we are into this discussion what philosophy is really all about. And I think that philosophy for me is, firstly, it is about just showing what reality is, just presenting reality, what reality is. And this is done in a very strange way in a way, because we are trying to bringing what is very known for, using our eyes, or it seems very known for us. We are trying to in a way making this a bit more blurry, and at the same time what we don't, by our first experience know or feel or understand, we are trying to bring this more into reality, like the Platonic ideas that you was like exampling, which I understand that it's not like any, it's just the abstract part of reality, and this abstract part of reality is also part of the world and of reality. So it's more like, this is my understanding. But of course, one of the problem in this, what we have been saying now, I think, is that we are like, we are not only saying that there hasn't been any development, but we are even like suggesting or hinting that maybe it's even becoming degenerated, that this is becoming lower, that what was actually good thoughts on what truth is has like, because we are just making it more complex without really trying to grasp the essence of what truth is, or
Yeah, I mean, I would like to raise two questions here. One is that actually, yes, I mean, going to this issue of what is really philosophy, because we have two other closely related phenomena. We have science that is also trying to somehow come in terms with what is both real and what is true. And we have religion, that what we call religion, that is also sort of wrestling with these same issues. So what does philosophy offer us, which is different from, or sort of more than, what science and religion, and going actually to the theme of this podcast, like, is philosophy part of Athens or Jerusalem, or is it some sort of a bridge between them, or is there a third city that is philosophy? So I think that would be one question. And then the other question about this whole thing about how we can understand truth. And yes, the fact that it's possible to create lots of sort of how to say, alternative worlds which are coherent, sort of worlds of truth. But I wonder whether actually the main, and in a way essentially the only truth claim that a human being is in a position to decide about is who is a channel to truth. In a way, like a student, a student is not expected to come up with a realization of which one of the various theories that he has maybe distantly heard about are true. I mean, for the student, the most important thing is to find a school, or find a professor. And in the old days, of course, when universities were man differently. People would travel from different parts of Europe to sit at the foot of one learned man and learn from him. So I wonder whether sort of identifying a source of knowledge and truth is a bit like if you travel to a new country, or if you want to take a visit to a jungle that you have, a rainforest that you've never been to. The most important decision is to find a good guide that will show you what is significant and important, and take you out of there alive or something like that, rather than trying to yourself read all the possible stuff about it and then make your own sort of tour program.
What you are like ending in is in a way my understanding of what philosophy and these 2,500 continuing discussions over the same topic has like been. There's no one that actually have this channel, like this source. So every one of us actually have to use our own ability of thinking. So in a way, every generation has to start all over again and trying to get into this kind of questions or experience that are bringing up these questions. And then they are starting to discuss with each other. And they have like this over and over and over again continuing. So it is like being going around in the world without actually having a guide, that you have to like just. And of course, what is this idea then that we actually have the same ability of thinking, that we have like a common sense of thinking. And just give one example that if we really start to think of it, I'm just giving a thesis, and you can think is this correct? And the question is the more important something is for human being, the less possible it is actually for human being to be able to measure or to grasp what this is. Like I can measure how many friends I have, but I can't measure what friendship is, real friendship. Could we agree on this just by thinking? Does that mean that this is a truth, but there's no one that can guide us? It's just that every one of us has to like think of this and just feel, just by our thoughts, by our inner soul, our ability of just being a thinking human being and using our common sense, we'll be able to actually to agree on this.
If I could
question.
Put my finger on, I think, what the question behind the question is, especially that Cami brought up, and it's the question of authority. You're asking, well, is there a channel to the truth? And behind that is a question of, are there authorities in anything? And this is where I think a dividing line between Athens and Jerusalem arises, at least the way traditionally this has been thought of. And this is where philosophy and science fall on one side of this, I think, clearly, and religion, as traditionally understood, falls on the other side. And it's with regard to the notion of authority. In both, of course, there's a student-teacher kind of relationship. You come into the world not knowing anything, and you have to learn, and you pick a teacher that's able to teach you. But in science as well as in philosophy, there's always the possibility of the student outstripping the teacher. Mm-hmm. There's always the possibility that the teacher is going to be surpassed, because ultimately they're human and fundamentally, let's say ontologically, epistemologically at the same level as the student. They may know more just as a function of time because they happen to be in the world sooner, but they don't have an intrinsically superior mode of access to the truth. The teacher does not have an intrinsically superior mode of access to the truth over the student. Whereas in the way religion has been conceived over the ages is that there is a source of truth. There is an individual, a prophet, who serves as a channel for the truth, capital T truth. And the students of those prophets, the members of the religions, don't see themselves as ontological metaphysical equals with the prophet. However they may advance in their pursuit of the truth, in their attempt at reaching what is real and getting to the ground of being and so forth, there's no sense that, oh, you too could become just like the prophet or even outstrip the prophet. And so there's a notion of authority which is embedded in the sort of the Jerusalem side of Athens, Jerusalem, which runs, I think, rather profoundly against the secular tendency of the modern age, which is could impart a result of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution and this kind of collective realization that there are no unchallengeable authorities, whether they're religious or whether they're scientific or whether they're in matters of governance or name any department of human life. What Western civilization came to the realization of 500 odd years ago was this letting go of the idea that there's something like unchallengeable authority. And if we want to measure the truth of things by the results, well, what are the results of this? There are great things that came of this, but there maybe not so great things that came of this.
Yeah, I really agree with you, but I think there is like one authority also in Athens, and it is actually the truth or knowledge that is like the authority.
Yes.
But it is not a scientific truth. It is more like a metaphysical truth. Mm-hmm. It is like this. And it's even like we don't really have as a human being, we are not able actually to reach this truth, but we can just have it as some kind of authority that we can try to reach, but we would never reach it. And when I'm talking now, I can just realize that this could just have been like the truthful God. But it's like, okay, let's stay with truth as something that is beyond the human existence ability to reach. But we can reach that. We can understand that the more important something is for human being, the more difficult it is to actually grasp it or to measure it or to find it. But we know that this is the importance. We know that friendship, real friendship, is important for us. But we are not able to say what this is, or we can use metaphors, as we say. And in this way, if I'm back to Cameron's question, I would say that philosophy is closer to religion than science. That philosophy has this metaphysical or this, only the gods can know the truth. Human are just human. We have been, the hermeneutics would say that Hermes, this god Hermes, that's why hermeneutic. Hermes is like bringing us knowledge from the God, and we can actually reach sometimes just by thinking or by reading people that has been, and maybe this is kind of guides because they have been closer to truth than I have been, so I can try to reach, and then I can understand them even nearly as gods. But of course not gods, then they are losing their humanity. But it's like there are some like distinction here in this to have this message. But what I also wanted to say in this is that, okay, philosophy is then, in my understanding, very important because it's actually trying to understand what friendship is, or what, Plato was really writing a lot about this, or this question, what we would say is the most important question. And this is really important for me to, but when Plato was writing, he wasn't writing about all kind of question. It was the most important. It was the questions of human existence, and this is really important. And I would even say that, okay, because my next question is this: what kind of rationality is actually motivating human action? I mean, people want to stop smoking, and they have all this kind of scientific knowledge about what is the danger of this, but nothing is happening. But one day they are realizing that they're going to die if they not stop smoking, and they quit immediately. And what is happening in their rationality? What kind of rationality is getting into them when they are suddenly realizing something that this science has been, messing all the time, over and over and over again, how dangerous this is. But it's not happening. But suddenly something is happening. And for me, it's connected very much deeply to our philosophical, or to this, and it's in many ways very basic questions. And it's a question you, Stephen, was starting with. This question about what is reality? Who am I? What is human being? What is a good life? And then suddenly something is snapping into them. Something that in their daily routines, the lack of really being in the world, they're just, smoking and having a good time, as I was saying, and laughing. But then suddenly existence are hitting them. And this existence are giving them new thoughts. They're giving them common sense. And suddenly they just realize what is life all about.
May I further complicate, but also maybe try to bring some strands together? See, I think, when earlier on Stephen talked about this, what is the cash value? I mean, I think it's not a stupid question, because I mean, it's one thing to know what the truth is in some sort of a personal metaphysical sense, but in today's world, very obviously, we are not going to get anywhere if we have our personal differing convictions about truth that we have worked out through our own minds, because we quite clearly need some sort of, orchestra conductor in today's world. I mean, if we cannot, on a very practical level, be able to coordinate or order our lives so that we have a society which is not unjust, that is not warring, and so forth, we might destroy ourselves even physically. So I think this truth is not just a kind of a, in that sense, just personal, philosophical, metaphysical thing. It needs to have some sort of a practical implication for how we as humanity can live together in today's interconnected global society. So I think that necessarily calls for the ability to accept some form of mutual authority, or some sort of a reference point that is not just personal and is not just my own kind of idea. So that is, I think, one of the issues also that needs to be taken into account here.
I totally agree, and if you accept that human is not able to grasp truth, but we should actually search for it, then of course we need laws. For instance, laws should have authority in the ethical perspective, because this is the only way we can trying to bring, and there should of course be positive laws. laws that are telling us not what we should not do, but what kind of room we could have in existence, that we have freedom to bring things together. But I just also, Cameron, when I was saying that, I understand that philosophy actually is what motivates human action. I mean, our own, like, I would say that every one of us have like a philosophy. That means we have a worldview. And this worldview is in many ways the most important thing when it comes to what motivates human action. So for me, philosophy is extremely practical. It is actually what is practice is all about. And I've been doing a study on this. I was observing teachers over a while, and I was writing down, what they were doing. And afterwards, I was giving them the possibility of listening. No, I mean, reading all I have written and giving comments on it. And then I analyzed this based on this idea about what is existence, what is human being. And you could really see how consistent their action was when it comes to their understanding of what human is. What is human? What is actually a classroom? What is like? So this worldview is very important in my understanding. Of course, you would say, if you could, of course, criticize my science and say that, but this you will find this everywhere. This is not like this is not possible to prove, and it's not possible to prove. It's just something that you can do just to show that this is also a way of understanding that philosophy is actually what motivates human action. I can never prove this. For me, this is common sense, but I'm no possibility of proving it. So this is just something I have to like stay with. And of course, this is a problem that we can't prove philosophy in the same way as we can prove scientifically hypothesis or trying to falsify them. We can't even try to falsify philosophy. But then, and now it comes to the difficult question, is of course that, okay, if philosophy hasn't changed much in 2,500 years, maybe even degenerated in some way, and this is what actually are the motives of human action, does that mean that we are in many ways just acting the same way as they did in the antique society? And my answer would of course be yes. Why? Well, for instance, we are more focusing on our own desire than on our will or ability to think. This is also something that Plato was very much aware of in his writing. And even if we are like trying to satisfy all our desires, then the only thing that would happen is mostly that we will have even more desires. And for the more desires we are trying to bring into ourselves, then even more desires are coming to us, and we are like continuing struggling to get more property on my own. And this is just human being, as long as we are just motivated by our desire as our philosophy. Or whatever we are thinking, but so I would call this like a worldview or a philosophy. And unfortunately, this is in many ways our situation today too in the Western society. Of course, a lot of us are like trying to balance our own desire, or trying to to regulate what is our needs and what is our will and what is our ability of thinking. But we are still in the same, how to say it, human existence.
There's so many threads we could pick up and follow but the one that is sticking out the most to me is Cammie's point about, which is kind of independent of, do we really have access to the truth? Because it gets to the purely pragmatic problem of, we are currently living in a world that seems to be on the precipice of some great disaster. And this great disaster, it will be one ultimately of our own making, whether it's an environmental disaster or a military disaster or the next great pandemic that we can't collectively solve because we're too fragmented. And the pragmatic problem is finding some kind of unity above the fragmentation. And it's such a complex problem because fragmentation by itself is not necessarily bad because it allows for a diversity of perspectives to flourish, and in a very complex environment you want a maximum number of approaches to various solutions, because you maximize your chance of finding a good solution in a situation in which there's a great deal of complexity. And so on the one hand, we can argue, well, we need some overarching framework that we all agree to, because otherwise we're going to destroy ourselves. So we need to find unity. We need to find some set of laws we can all agree to. We need to find some vision of the truth we can all agree to. And it seems clear to me that something like that has to happen. But the other half of me says, wait, there's danger there. The danger of switching to some monolithic frame of reference about the truth, about human behavior, about how we ought to act and be. I mean, first of all, the danger is that we actually get farther away from the truth because we're not exploring various paths simultaneously. But another danger is that all of these monolithic approaches, attempts to sort of let's all unify around this particular worldview, have such potential for abuse and oppression of others. And so it's just so complicated. I mean, yes, the world needs to come up with a vision of truth that allows us to coordinate as a species. How can we do that without the huge potential drawbacks of a monolithic system that ends up quieting voices that need to be heard?
Yeah, I think this is a very important issue, and I think here, I mean, when we talked about this, especially the Western resistance of the thought of a authority, especially if it should be a superhuman authority, I think that's very much a psychological issue more than anything else, because there's this notion that if you accept some sort of a authority that is above you categorically, as you said, that an authority that you can never actually really challenge, then it will lead to you becoming enslaved and in the worst case, subjugated to some evil will. And I think that this idea between that the choices are between totalitarian notions of truth or some sort of a absolute relativism, as it were. I think this is a false dichotomy and a false choice. I think that there is the choice of considering that, and I think science, in many ways, as a method, really embodies that third choice, where there is the notion, especially in natural science, that there is an ultimate truth or reality, but that we can look at it from different angles, we can discuss it, and we can develop our understanding of it, and we can become enriched. And so it's not and it's interesting that when it comes to science, nobody feels somehow enslaved by the fact that an atom is built in a certain way. But if you talk about the fact that a society should be built in a certain way, then people start getting very uneasy about it. So I think that we need to try to see if what are there, could we assume that there are certain sort of laws that regulate human existence the same way as laws that regulate physical reality, but also the fact, I think we briefly touched this once in a previous session, and we could come back to it, that I think we talked about this. This is an analogy that some philosopher, I don't remember who, came up with, that our approach to truth can be the kind of process that a jazz jam session is about, where you don't have where on the one hand you don't have like a ready music sheet that you're following. So you're listening to each other and you're complementing each other and you're going forward and you're sort of creating it as you go. But at the same time, there are certain rules that you have to follow. So it's not like you cannot play any note after another note. So it's um, this sort of a balance of unity and diversity, and I think that it's something along those lines that we have to look for if you are to be able to continue our lives in some meaningful way, or even in a physical way as the human race.
I really agree on Cameron on this, that there's no different. I mean, the opposite of totalitarianism is not relativism. It's quite the opposite. In my understanding, totalitarian is in many ways relativistic. So when for instance when Trump is saying that alternative facts and all this, like you can say whatever, just then this is a totalitarian way of thinking. So it's extremely important to understand that, and our that we are so afraid of this about indoctrination. I mean, of course, we have this understanding that the most important thing about the totalitarian rules, the governmental way of ruling totalitarian, was indoctrination. But Hannah Arendt, she wrote this really impressive book in the, like just directly after the war, after her own experience being a female, a woman Jew in Nazi Germany. And she said that the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for who this distinction between facts and fictions and the distinction between true and false no longer exist. And this is exactly what you're doing when you are doing relativistic, like saying, no, but my fact is my fact, because I have my worldview or you have your worldview, and there's no thing like a common sense. And this kind of like, because we are so afraid of indoctrination that we would rather stay in like in a relativistic way of understanding reality. And then they don't understand that what they are actually doing. This is totalitarian way of thinking. So we are continuing in the same direction as they did by the Nazis. And it's even in the school system. I mean, most of the school system is like they're trying to avoid having indoctrination in school. This is like the most dangerous thing is that the school and the classroom should be democratic. And what you are doing then is you're just removing knowledge as the authority of the classroom. And by removing knowledge, you're also removing the teacher's authority of the classroom, because the teacher's authority is based on that he knows more than the students. That's why he's a teacher and they are students. But when you're removing this and like a democratization of knowledge and all these kind of very strange ideas, is very dangerous. So what you're actually doing is that when you're removing these authorities from the classroom, you're not removing authority from the classroom. There's always some kind of authority. And what is left? It is other students, other pupils behaving badly. I mean, it's the majority of the classroom that is actually the dictator of the classroom based on this totalitarian way of thinking education. And this is really dangerous because it's like we are removing all this authority that we actually want to bring in and we need if we want to love the world. And what we are instead doing is that we are trying to press every children to love themselves or to be critical towards the world. Instead of loving the world, they are critical towards the world based on this extremely bad situation they are living in a bullying situation, in a situation where there are hierarchy, so many hierarchies. Students are fighting for being the cool one or the bossy one in classroom, instead of having a teacher that is actually in the authority based on the knowledge. Now I brought actually the classroom into this discussion too.
Yeah. Let me bring another thread in to a conversation that maybe is already complicated enough. But one thing we haven't yet addressed that really divides the scientific project, which we would love to, all of humanity to sort of be in on, because it's produced so much and it seems to produce some kind of ground consensus about reality. But how does it do that? It does it because ultimately the language in which it is expressed is the language of numbers. It's the language of mathematics. Whereas philosophy, the Jerusalem side, but also the Athens side, as it regards philosophy, the fundamental elements, the atomic constituents of the ideas are words. And the difference between numbers and words is the difference between something which can be we can have some objective certainty and some objective consensus around numbers, and words, which it's impossible to have objective consensus around words. Because, well, what is a word? It's a it's a signifier of something underneath that there is no consensus on. Even though we have dictionaries that try to define words, well, what's the actual reality behind a word? Especially the more important the word is, the less fundamental consensus there is about what that word is.
Yeah.
And so we're left with a kind of, I think, the direction that Nietzsche went when he was asking about truth. He says, well, what is truth? He says, it's a mobile host of metaphors. It's stories that we tell each other. And over time, they take on the veneer of truth, when really this is just, words being passed around. And it's really something like power dynamics, or it's who can tell the best story, or whatever. Because when it comes to words, in the end, there's no ground truth. It's, words are, it's too difficult to pin, reality onto a particular word. Where you can do it with a number, you can do it with an equation, but you can't do it with a word, which is unfortunate, because the words we need are, words like justice, words like love and unity, and things that
friendship
we want in the world. Well, and friendship that we were talking about earlier. These are the most important words, but they're the hardest words to find consensus around.
Yeah, totally. And this is also, when I said that the more important thing is for the human existence, the less possibility of measuring. And measuring is, of course, something that we can do by numbers or by quantity. And even there's also one more distinction, and this is, I think that with turning everything into numbers, even like reality into numbers, we are even turning it into like a kind of economy. That instead of actually discussing what is the best for the human being and the best for the common community, what I understand, because this is what I understand politics should be about, this is what is actually the best for human beings. That is like the main idea about politics in the old Greek. But when we are turning everything that we can measure, and often that is about prosperity and it's about development and measuring and all these kind of, then we are actually ending up in desire as like our main worldview. that what we are like interested in is what can give us more of economical wealth. And of course, this is not sustainable at all. Desire is not sustainable if we want a sustainable existence, because we have to be in balance with nature. But we are just, we are just continuing doing more of, because we want more and more and more based on this idea. It seems like there was nothing more to say after this.
Well, Wittgenstein, I think, was on the right idea where he says you get to a certain point where you realize the fundamental limits of language, and the only appropriate next step is silence.
So maybe actually is a good. I think we have been discussing this about have we has this anything changed in philosophy since Plato? And in many ways, what I was saying was more or less exactly what Plato was writing 2005. That was where I ended.
Changed. But you might say, oh, we have better gadgets. But a century ago, they dredged up out of the sea off the island of Antikythera, this mechanism, which was this incredible gadget that they had 2,000 odd years ago that could predict eclipses and do amazing things. It was a mechanical computer. We don't know. I think we've lost, because it just wasn't recorded in the histories that we happened to that happened to be preserved. We've lost a real understanding of just how technically sophisticated the Greek civilization was 2,500 years ago, and we think ourselves now so superior to those primitive peoples who and yes, obviously in some ways we are vastly more technically sophisticated, but I don't know. At the same time, there's a kind of cyclicality, and just because you have the gadgets doesn't make you better as a civilization.
No, for me, producing more production, like technology or whatever, that's not it's not changing anything. It's just continuing doing more of what we already have been doing too much. It's not helping on friendship. Rather the opposite, I would think. Even though people are having friendship with AI today. Just one thing I was starting to think that, based on what you were saying, Stephen, is that I think it's Heidegger that is saying that his understanding of truth is, I know there's more than just what I'm saying now, but truth is what we are actually caring. So what we are preserving in our society, what we are caring for, is actually what we understand as the truth. So when I'm presenting the grown-up generation in the school, I'm trying to bring forward what I care for to the next generation, and then of course the next generation will care for what they understand is the truth in what I'm saying, and what they don't agree with me on, they will of course reject. Hopefully based on their experience and based on what reality is all about, and then they will care for their. And of course, this is also the understanding that the curriculum, what we should political should say that this is what school should be about, is actually what we are caring for in our world, in our grown-up world. And then when we start to think, what have we actually cared for in the last 2,500 years? It has not been this gadget, but it has actually been philosophy. Philosophy has been cared for, and religion has been cared for really for a long time. And we have taken so good care of it. And suddenly we are in a situation where we are we are not caring for religion anymore. And even history, we are wondering, do we care for history? And the ideas of history and philosophy, do we care for it? Because this have been, and of course, if you understand as I, that the most important thing of my motivation in life is actually my philosophy. Now, of course, you should care for philosophy, because that's actually what is giving me something for my next generation. Of course, we are caring for science today, and maybe we are caring for it too much, because in a way, what we are caring for is the science that can bring us more technology, bring us more desire, bring us more away from nature in many ways.
That's a great implicit definition of truth, the thing that you care most about. And I think there's a perfect analog to that across the divide into the Jerusalem space, which is the thing that you worship is not the thing that you verbally assent to sitting in the comfort of your chair saying, well, I believe in God and I worship God. No, the thing that you worship is the thing that you focus your attention on, the thing that you spend your time on. That is the thing that you worship. And by that definition of worship, most people are worshipers of idols, idol of material success and in its various facets. That's what people in fact worship, even if they're churchgoers, even if they verbally say, well, I believe in God in this particular way, and that's the thing. No, the truth is, the thing that you care for, the thing that you focus all of your effort and your attention around, the thing that you spend your time on, that's the thing that you worship.
Yeah, and then I would like to end with Hannah Arendt again, because she's also saying something about what is then inside school. What is it like a totalitarian school? Because a totalitarian school is more or less not giving anything to care about. They are not trying to show the children any world that they could love, or to, any content at all. They're just being there and making them into some kind of robots and believing that if I just tell you enough times that you should think critical, then you will start think critical. But of course, this is just there's no way that you're going to think critical if you don't have a knowledge, because critical thinking means you have to have a measurement. You have to have something like a standard to be critical towards what you are experiencing. And this standard is your knowledge, is what you are caring for. So being critical is, in many ways, it should be like, if I'm just giving you the standard, then you can become critical when this standard doesn't fit to your experience. And then you are critical. But as long as you're not giving them anything to care about, nothing to convince about. So a totalitarian education, in many ways, it's a system where we are just bringing the children into the classroom and just trying to, preach different kind of skills or behavior into the children. And then in the end, of course, the children is just, they're so bored, they have no world to love. And they're trying to love themselves just by, even this life skills or this, yeah. So I think about caring and about loving, I think that's really close to what truth could be for a human being, yes.
So could I just suggest, so that, because this session has been interesting, because we have, as I think is always a good case, we have come up with more questions than answers. And I think that I would like to suggest that in the near future, because now we have been talking about things that haven't changed, and in many ways, like how humanity is sort of stuck in certain paths over centuries and maybe even millennia. But I think that's not the whole issue. I'm sorry, that's not the whole picture. And just like a human individual, obviously from childhood to old age is the same individual, and there are certain things that don't change that much. Or anyway, the elements within the human being are the same, but there are points in time when some very radical changes take place. For instance, when we shift from or transit from childhood into adulthood, that's a great uh, uh, transformative step. We're still the same human being, but some new things come up, and both new challenges and new possibilities. And I would like us to maybe discuss at the next session in the near future what is new about the times that we live in, and what are those new possibilities and challenges that we are facing as humanity that we didn't have 2,000 years ago. Because I think that might open up also some new views into where to go from here, because we obviously cannot look back into the past to find the answers. We have to look into the future and understand the times in which we live now, which I believe are very special and unique times in human history.
I think I'm really happy, Cameron, that you understand that I have made more questions out of this and not just being answering everything now, because I feel that I've been answering, but and of course it's interesting that this idea that of course reality is always changing. This is maybe one of the only thing that is eternal. It's actually the change in reality. So of course there has been, and there's, we know about evolution. Things are changing. So I think it would be a really interesting topic. I'm just wondering if we are actually going to have a guest next time. So maybe
Yes,
we will
it won't
wait.
be next time. That's why I said in the near future. Yeah,
Yeah, in the near future. Yeah. So because so I think we will end now. So thank you so much for listening,
Yes, thank you.
and really looking forward then to our guest next time, and then hopefully in July we will discuss what is actually new in reality. So thank you so much for listening.
Okay.
You have been listening to Athens and Jerusalem, created by Cameron Namdar, Stephen Phelps, and Knut Ove Essay. Nora Juel is the broadcast voice and technical support. Music is pieces of Edvard Grieg's Morning Mood. The voices in the intro are Viktor Frankl, interview with Robert Oppenheimer, and Pope John Paul II. Thank you for listening, and please check out another episode.